What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another subscriber Q&A/comments video. I got lots of nice comments from you guys over the last week or so, so I put together a few of the choice bits for you guys and wanted to talk more about them. As you can see in the thumbnail for the video, we've got a pretty wide assortment of topics. As always, thank you to my Patreon supporters. For those of you interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, it's patreon.com/Action Figure Grader. And stay tuned because I am going to announce the winner of the Target exclusive Droids animated series Boba Fett. I did the drawing, and I also am going to answer that subscriber's question. So let's dig right into some awesome comments. 101 Chillin', he says, new to the channel, love the content. It would be cool to hear more stories, lessons learned from your personal, professional investing background, as you mentioned in a recent video. Thanks. So, for those of you who may be new to the channel, I used to be an investment banker. I did like public offerings for companies on the stock exchanges. I did private debt placements. I did mergers and acquisitions, secondary offerings, all kinds of fun stuff like that. And while I hated the job, I worked between 80 and 110 hours a week. I was very well compensated for it straight out of college. I was making way more money than I even had time to spend. I was just exhausted all of the time. It was a terrible lifestyle. And my only advice to those of you looking at investment banking as a career, only look at it as a stepping stone to something else. And for me, I did it for 4 years. I got fired from both jobs because both jobs coincided with the internet bust in 2000. And then later on, around 2004, there was a mini recession where a lot of the investment banks went through a restructuring, and I was a casualty of that. And they gave me like a year's severance. I had a year's pay and severance. So I had time to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I went back to business school to get my MBA. I promptly left the MBA program because, unfortunately, pretty much everything that they were teaching that I was interested in, I had already learned on the job. And it's not to take away from MBAs at all. It's just that I had already kind of learned it all. I had straight A's, and I was just bored out of my skull, and I was paying a lot of money for it. So I decided to go into real estate. And my family has a history in real estate. And I decided to just jump right in, feet first, with no kind of experience. I got all the licensing done. I became a licensed real estate agent, and then I opened my own firm in 2007. So I've had my own brokerage and property management business, buyer and seller representation since then, and I've never looked back. And my only advice for those of you who are, and we're going to talk another question that's similar to this in a second, but my only advice really is that you get out from underneath the thumb of somebody else as quickly as you can and do your own thing. I'm really happy that I did that, and I set my own hours. I'm always here for my kids in the morning and in the evening usually, and it shows. My kids appreciate the fact that I'm always around and available. I'm probably around more than they want, but in general, I've found the lifestyle change to be better. And that's not to say that I don't work. I go through periods where I work my tail off and have very long hours, but at least it's for my own company, my own business. So that would be my only advice there, but that's a great question that I received. David Steffens, he says, great video as always. Congratulations on 4K subs, much deserved. My question, have I ever regretted sending something in for grading? Yes, all of the time. I sent in like Retro Collection, the Wave 1 Retro Collection, or Wave 2, the Mandalorian, the first set of Mandalorian Retro. I don't know why I did that. It was terrible. I ended up selling them for cost or less. I think I lost money on most of them, and that's okay. But I've kind of just veered away from the retro collection. I just don't think it fits my collection. But in general, sure, I regret sending stuff in all the time, or I regret it after the fact once I get the grade back. If the grade's not what I want. But in general, it's just a hobby. I don't. It's not like life or death type situation with any of this stuff. It's just a hobby that I've enjoyed. I like sending stuff in to get graded to see what kind of grades we get. Some of it I sell off, some of it I keep. Most of it I keep, unfortunately, as you can see behind me. But it's just a fun process. I enjoy searching for really mint, especially vintage Kenner stuff, to see what kind of grades I can pull out. And when you see some of the prices that we see in these vintage Kenner market updates, it's always a lot of fun to kind of compare those prices versus what I paid. And to know that for some of the items that I have, I've built up some nice equity, so to speak, in some of the items in my collection. Jason Fortier says, Is now the time to buy? It seems like prices are as low as they've been in 3 years or more. Or do you think everything will keep tanking? I got a lot of questions like this, so I just picked out Jason's. But Jason, thank you for watching and for the question. I think in general, we're at the very beginning. It's just like, if you look at what the economy globally is doing, and the U.S. Specifically, we're at the very beginning of what I consider to be a pretty major recession. Yesterday, this morning, July 13th, more inflation data came out that shows that inflation's as hot as ever. It came in above expectations, and the Fed is doing its best to try to tamp down this inflation problem. And the more money that we have to spend on everyday living stuff, the less money that people are going to put towards discretionary type items like collectibles. And it's already happened very quickly within the comic book market. There's been a pretty massive price readjustment. Now, is the comic book market as low as it was like in 2019? I would argue the answer is no. If you look at some of the price graphs on all of the comic collecting websites, we're still, for a lot of comics, well above those prices. So I don't think it's really hit the action figure market quite as readily or quite as quickly as it has in the comic book market, but I expect prices to continue to see downward pressure. And me personally, if I spend a lot of money, it's got to be something that I really want and that I find to be very hard to find. For example, I just picked up a Return of the Jedi clear blister transition card 48 back Cloud Car Pilot. I wanted it for my run, and I overpaid for it. I know that I overpaid for it, but I was willing to do that because I'd had some money saved up for it. But if moving forward, if it's something that I want, but it's not something that I necessarily need, which is 99.9% of items, I'm going to be very picky about what price I pay. And I fully expect by this fall that we're going to start seeing massive price drops in collections because people are going to run out of savings as they pay for these higher grocery bills and fuel costs and rent money and everything else. And I just think we're at the very beginning of it. If you think you're seeing lower prices now, just wait, because I really believe that the other shoe has not dropped yet. The collectibles market has just not been hit quite as quickly, at least in action figures, as the comic book market, and I fully expect that market to see price drops. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong, but if I am right, I'll kind of do a follow-up video. But at least right now, I just haven't quite seen it yet. Prices are still, for the most part, very high. There are some exceptions. Boba Fett loose graded Boba Fetts have come down a little bit in price. Just certain things here and there, very common items are coming down in price. If it's rare and it's high grade, it's still selling for ridiculous prices. And I think that the latest Hicks auction that ends like July 27th, 28th, somewhere in there, will be a telltale sign because there are a number of very rare items in there. And once that market gets hit, it's going to trickle down because the people who are buying mint on card vinyl cape Jawas in high grade, they typically are not affected by recessions. Okay. But if we start seeing those price drops, you can probably trickle down to the more common items, the more common graded items that you and I are buying versus those heavy hitters. So we'll see what happens at the end of this month. But I think we're just at the beginning stages of a price drop in all action figures for Star Wars. Ed 5, shout out to Ed. Well done on 4K, mate. If a graded figure's peg breaks, does it depreciate its grading? Yes, the answer is yes. I've had a number of items where the little pegs or the little dowels that hold the head in place on loose graded figures, or even mint on cards, if one of the slides breaks or cracks or something like that, you're going to get less money for it. That's just a fact. I've seen sellers where they've tried to hide that, and I've been guilty, or I've been the victim of buying something like that, where the seller showed the old photos and then in very small print in the auction description says peg has broken inside, and I bought it without really closely looking at it, and then I had to get it recased. So yes, if you have something that has a broken peg or something like that inside a loose graded figure, for example, it's not worth as much. That's just a fact. And I would recommend sending it back in to get regraded. And I've done that for 3 or 4 of mine where the pegs are either broken because I've dropped it like an idiot, or it's broken in shipping and I've gotten reimbursed, things like that. I've never had anything get a lower grade because of a broken peg, but that's not to say that it couldn't happen, because that peg can shift around inside that little case and can cause scratching to the figure. So me personally, I've broken them out of cases using a pry bar and a hammer, and very carefully tapping the case open and then resubmitting it for grading. And the grades, by the way, have always come back exactly the same as what they were previously. Winner of the giveaway. So Adam Golaski, you were, I did the drawing, and you were the winner of the Target exclusive Droids Boba Fett. So please reach out to me by email, actionfiguregrader@gmail.com, and send me your mailing address, and I will be happy to ship out to you that Target exclusive Boba Fett. I already left a message in this comment below it, but I haven't heard back from you. So I'll give you about a week or so, and then I'll do another drawing. So make sure to reach out to me. Adam says, I'm curious about what I consider to be an unusual Star Wars giveaway, the survival kit. It was a very strange giveaway. He's talking about the vintage Kenner survival kit that came in boxes. It was a mail away that was on the 41 back A Empire Strikes Back cards. It included like some backpacks and some weapons and things like that inside. And how do you tell what it is? I've actually got a Canadian example, and the Canadian example just came in that white mailer box with the sealed baggie. The US version came with a pamphlet, like a little single leaflet that describes what you have inside the box, as well as a Kenner catalog. And so there's 2 or 3 or 4 different examples. There's like a Palatoy version, the Canadian, obviously, and then the US version. And you just got to make sure that you have exactly the right one. And there are plenty of resources online for baggies, and I should have pulled that up for this video. But if you search Vintage Kenner Star Wars Baggie Guide on Google, it will pop up immediately, and it's a very good resource for identifying which baggie you have and make sure you have the right box and things like that. It's not very heavily reproed, as Adam mentioned in his comment. I've never seen like fake ones, but I guess that anything's possible these days with people trying to get a quick buck. But if you're looking for that survival kit baggie, just look on the Facebook groups like Deal or No Deal, or eBay, obviously. But in general, they're not that hard to find. I've seen a few graded examples. I've seen some ungraded examples on eBay. As I mentioned, I picked up a sealed Canadian example from a Canadian seller on eBay for like 125 bucks. And then I had CAS display it inside the case, and it was noted as an uncirculated since they opened the sealed mailer box. So just be on the lookout. But I haven't seen any repro versions of that. I guess anything's possible, though. Rob Chewbacca says, what do you consider to be the top reasons a figure in card back loses value? This is a really good question. I think that for white figures, if it's heavily discolored inside the blister, like a Luke Farm Boy or a Princess Leia or a Stormtrooper or a Hoth Stormtrooper, it's got heavy yellowing inside the blister, that will certainly detract from the value. Heavily yellowed blisters are probably the #1 thing, in my opinion. Or cracked blisters. If it's a cracked blister, it's going to dramatically drop the value of that item, because it's not going to get a high grade, with anyone who wanted to submit it to grading. It's so fragile. Once it's cracked, it can shatter really easily, especially yellowed blisters, and you would need to get reinforcement for those. Collector Archive Services does offer what's called preserved grading, where they only grade the figure inside of a cracked blister. That's another option for you. But in general, yellowed blisters, I think, are probably the #1 thing. And then when you start talking about the card condition, anything with a major litho tear or heavy creases that are color breaking, that show on both sides of the card. You can have a very slight crease that doesn't show on the back or vice versa. That won't be nearly as big of a detraction on value as a heavy crease that's color breaking that shows on both sides. But in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, yellowed blisters and cracked blisters are going to detract the most from the value of a mint on card vintage Kenner Star Wars item. Jer Bet 97, shout out to Jer. He is a very well-known collector on the Facebook groups and has an incredible collection. I've bought from him in the past. Thank you, Jer, for watching. What does Action Figure Grader enjoy collecting more as of today? Vintage Kenner or modern? There's no question that vintage Kenner is always going to take precedent for me over modern Star Wars stuff. Be honest with you, I'm kind of fed up with the vintage collection, with the route they're taking, with the blister-free packaging, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. And I've definitely cut back a lot on the vintage collection stuff. I only get the certain characters that I really like the ARC Troopers or the Mandalorian Super Commandos or the Lando Battlefront 2. There's certain characters that I like. But in terms of what I display in my collection room, I've got a couple of rows up here of some really rare Power of the Force 2 type items, but those are probably coming down sooner rather than later, because I've got 7 or 8 or 9 vintage Kenner mint on cards that are coming back from grading over the next couple of months. And something's got to give with my display space. I don't have enough room to display everything. So all of my modern stuff goes into drawers and boxes and closets, unfortunately. I just don't have the display space. And the only things I really display are vintage bootlegs, vintage Kenner, loose graded, as you can see, or vintage Kenner mint on card. And those are my favorites. There always will be, but I only pick up maybe one mint on card on average a month, and that's probably at best. I keep a running spreadsheet as to what I've picked up over the course of the year. So that way at the end of this year, I can do kind of a, year in summary, year in review type of video for the vintage Kenner line, as well as for the vintage collection or whatever else comics. And I've already picked up this year 12 mint on card vintage Kenner items. That's highly unusual for me. By July to pick up 12 MOCs. That's just not how I usually operate. But I have also sold a lot of stuff. I've sold a lot of modern stuff to pay for those items. It's not like I have endless money. So, but that's a great question. But in general, vintage Kenner is always going to be my first love. Gabe Star Wars has a long question here, and I'll kind of summarize. He says, I just need some career advice. I graduated with a degree in advertising and communications and a minor in architecture last December, but I haven't been able to find a good job, and it's harder now that we're going into a recession. What job do you think I should go into? Well, I'm never one to say what someone should do with their life, number one. But he says, I'm considering going back into school for sonography. And I had to look up what sonography was. Sonography is the diagnostic medical procedure that uses high-frequency sound waves to produce visual images of organs, tissues, blood. So let me tell you this, Gabe, and anyone else who's watching who's trying to consider what to do with their life. Medicine and healthcare are always recession-proof. My wife is a PhD in molecular genetics, okay? She is one of the smartest human beings on the planet. She's smart in every aspect of her life except for her choice in spouse, okay? So, and her job is as recession-proof as it gets, and she has done extremely well for herself. I would be lying if I told you that I was the earner of our family, okay? I am a moron compared to my wife, and her job is as recession-proof as it gets. Anything healthcare related will only continue to be in high demand because there's just not enough people doing it. It takes a lot of training, and anything that's kind of ancillary like sonography or radiology or, techs that are related to these high-tech kind of devices that are used now in medicine, they will only go up in demand, and I don't think that that's a bad choice if you decide that that's something you want to do. The negative of that is a lot of those folks come out with a lot of student debt. I've got zero student debt, and I love it. I love the fact that I don't have student debt payments. So you need to balance what the actual pay is for a sonography major versus what it's going to cost you and what your break-even point is. If your break-even point to pay back those student loans, if you need student loans, is like 10 years, then it doesn't make any sense to go into sonography. I just have no idea what the cost is for tuition to go into a graduate program for sonography. But you need to look at the break-even points. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just get those degrees and they worry about the student debt later. And then next thing you know, they have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt. So luckily for me, any idiot can do real estate with enough licensing and hours of continuing education. And it costs a lot less to become a real estate agent than it does in medicine. But my job is also highly recession sensitive. And my income is going to go down drastically over the next 11 to 18 months as we head into this recession. I would wager that my income next year will be 25% of what it is this year. And that's a sobering thing to think about. But at the same time, I'm prepared for that. And I've talked about that in past videos where I have a rainy day fund. And of course, I'm married to somebody whose job is somewhat recession proof. So that helps as well. But so I'm fortunate in that respect. But you need to balance all those things out. And I wish you the best of luck with your job hunt. Next up, Danny Allen. Shout out to Danny. He's a longtime subscriber and supporter of the channel. He's talking about TVC and the cusp of going plastic-free packaging. And he is wondering, how long is it going to take for the vintage collection line to die? And I would argue, and I've made this argument in past videos, that it's almost like Hasbro says, we're going to go plastic-free with packaging, and no matter what consumers say. And that just seems to be the route they're taking with the other toy lines out there, like Marvel Superheroes or Black Series or anything else. And he thinks it's going to be 2.5 to 3 years That's probably a really fair estimate, because demand for the vintage collection is going to go down big time once they move over to plastic-free packaging. I don't think it's going to be a slow death at all. I think it's going to be a fairly quick death, and I think the vintage collection will not be around in 3 years. That's my personal opinion on that. Unless something dramatically changes and they shift course and they decide to keep the packaging exactly the same. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. It seems like Hasbro is hell-bent on making sure that packaging for 3 3/4 inch vintage collection figures is going to go the way of the dodo, at least as it currently is presented to consumers. And they're making a huge mistake, but maybe they don't care. Maybe they just want to get rid of it and go to higher profit lines like the Marvel superheroes or Black Series or whatever they're looking at on a financial basis that tells them that the vintage collection is not as profitable as some of these other toy lines. It just seems to be the case that they're not listening to the toy community, and best of luck to them, because I, for one, once they move over to plastic-free packaging, I'm going to kiss the line goodbye. Thanks for the good times, folks, but I'm going to spend my money elsewhere, be it on graded CGC Star Wars comics or on vintage Kenner stuff. I'm just not going to touch plastic-free vintage collection. And then finally, a number of you did bring up the Haslab failed project, the Black Series Riva Force FX lightsaber. It did not come close to being funded. Shocker there. It seems like Hasbro cannot get out of its own way. And a number of people have made the point that, hey, this could have been forced on them by Disney, that Disney wanted to make this the Haslab project, and Hasbro, in the interest of keeping their relationship with Disney okay, they decided to launch this Haslab project for the lightsaber, knowing full well that it was very unlikely that this thing would get funded. And a number of you have also commented that, hey, this is probably still going to show up as an exclusive at Disney parks. I think that's also a possibility. But I think that everyone, once this was announced and everyone stopped laughing and stopped wiping their tears from the pure hilarity of trying to make this work as a Haslab project, I think everyone knew the writing was on the wall that this was not going to be a successful launch. And I'm surprised they even got 1,500 or whatever it was backers that they got. To me personally, I'm really shocked that they even got that many, given the price point of it. And it was just a ridiculous thing to even try to force on consumers. And I hope they learned their lesson that Haslab really works well with the vintage collection. It especially works well with vehicles or really elaborate play sets, as has been proven with some of the items in the past for the vintage collection that were Haslab only projects. And I hope that it's not the last of the items, but it just seems like Black Series is destined to fail with Haslab. And maybe Hasbro and Disney, if they're the ones forcing this on Hasbro, will listen to consumers, because consumers are speaking with their wallet, and rightly so, and not backing these types of stupid items. That's all I really had for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave a comment with other questions. Please like the video. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I'll be back soon.